NSLA attendees, tonight's town hall discussion, Building Back Better, the State of Education and Summer Learning in America, will be moderated by two extraordinary leaders who you will hear from momentarily. But first, to kick us off, please welcome the National Summer Learning Association's Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Aaron Dworkin.
For those of you who've been here all day, thank you for staying with us. The Summer Learning Pep Rally train ride continues. And thank you for those of you who are just joining us. Now, we have an amazing opportunity to hear from leaders, both national leaders, state leaders, local leaders, student leaders, about what this educational moment, what role summer learning plays in it, all mean and what it means for all of us. I'm very excited. You'll hear more from me in the next couple days, but I'm really excited to just get down to brass tacks and what does it mean, what does it look like, what are we in, and what can we learn? We have two amazing moderators. We have Karen Pittman. Many of you may know her. She's the founder from Forum for Youth Investment, former CEO. She just stepped down from that role. She's had an illustrious career in the world of education and youth development, softening the walls between silos for decades, but now has just been a huge leader in this work, and she's going to be the moderator of our first panel. And then she'll be followed by another amazing partner, Ellie Mitchell, who is the CEO of the Maryland Out of School Time, a partner for us, and she has had a huge career in education, youth development, promoting mentoring, community schools, building partnerships, advocating as well for young people and communities everywhere she's ever been. So she's going to be moderating the second half of this panel. I'm going to stop talking. I know it looks like they're on the dating game, but they're not. But they, in a weird professional way, they are very close. So no one's going to get kicked off. Nothing's going to splash in your head. This is as COVID-safe a stage as we could create here, and they have social distance from all of you. They're going to go through the panelists, but let me turn it over to Karen Pittman.
Thank you, Aaron, and I hope that there are going to be prizes at the end of this. I'm going to jump in because 30 minutes has already started to click down on the clock, and we have an amazing panel to talk to. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves to you as I ask them questions, so that and you have their names in front of you. I want to start out by turning to my far right. I'm left-handed, so I never know left from right, and asking Christian, you've been going around the country looking at programs. What excites you that you've seen?
Sure. So first, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And Christian Rhodes with the U.S. Department of Education. And I've had the pleasure, really since February 27th, my first day getting sworn in virtually, to really see what's happening across the country. And when it comes to summer and some of the work that we did this summer, what excited me the most was seeing students happy, students in safe environments, students with caring adults. And ultimately, for us, that meant that there was a sense of normalcy, of some level of returning back to what we knew is the secret sauce, which is that interaction between a caring adult and a student. Newark, New Jersey, we were at a community center in Newark, New Jersey, and the secretary was there talking to a group of students, and he said, well, what excites you about summer, and ultimately, will this excite you on the first day of school? And he said, as long as I can hear kids making noise, I will be excited about school. And I think that matters, right? And summer in particular, noise is good. Noise means that there's activities happening and that there is a sense of normalcy. So that's what excited us, and frankly, I think having the resource this time around to invest in communities, to make sure that summer and the work that was happening summer was part of the entire ecosystem was critically important for us.
I love that, and I love the noise. That was perfect. I'm going to come back to you to push on why it is that for some reason we really embrace the idea that we see noise in summer and in after school, but we don't like noise in school. But I'll come back to that later on.
I like it.
But I'm going to go to the other end and turn to Denise, because you talked about this money, and this is an incredible amount of money that we have. And Denise, when we were on the phone, you said one of my favorite words, which was infrastructure. So we're going to have wonderful anecdotes of what's happened over the summer. We're going to have wonderful sense that this thing could happen and go to scale. We've also got folks being concerned that if we scale up and the money goes away, it goes down. But there is something magic about that word infrastructure. What can we be doing so that we are not just building back better, we're building back for long term?
That's such a great question. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, NSLA, for having me here today. I'm Denise Forte, Interim CEO of the Education Trust. We are a research and advocacy organization working to narrow the opportunity gaps for students of color, students from low-income communities. We have been really thrilled with this unprecedented level of investment we're seeing from the federal government, particularly in evidence-based programs that we know work, of which summer is one of them. And what's really important here when you think about the money that is available is we do want the outcomes. The unfinished learning that we're seeing right now, it is not a one-year thing. It is not a two-year thing. And in fact, we don't know how long it will go and what the impact of that will be, which means we need to be thinking about the long term with these funds. Now, as Karen mentioned, the funds they actually will end at a certain date, I think 2024, 25, Christian. But what we can do is take advantage of the now, and the now is building an infrastructure of support for programs that have been shown to work. Summer learning, expanding the learning opportunities, accelerating the learning opportunities. And we build that infrastructure by thinking about what are the ways we're going to sustain this for the long term? What are the type of right now programmatic investments that we can then add on to with the other federal funds from Title I and Title IV that'll be available to us. We think infrastructure is not just about roads, it's not just about buildings, it is about our kids and how we are going to accelerate their learning for the long run and make sure we continue to tackle the inequities that existed long before the pandemic.
Terrific. You said another of my favorite words, and I do have a couple, and that was evidence. So now I'm going to turn this way, look through this glass, and talk to Jennifer. So there's a lot of people who think we have an opportunity to actually reimagine education, to reimagine the education system. We have a lot of conversation about ecosystem and how all of this fits together so that young people have more seamless experiences as they move, not just through time, from after school to summer to school, but also through different settings that really provide very different opportunities for learning and engagement. So when we think about evidence, what have we learned that we brought into the summer that allowed summers to be so successful, that allowed for that noise and joy and engagement that Christian talked about? And what should we be taking out of this unprecedented opportunity to really sort of step up? So as a researcher, what do you want us to really take away that we can use as evidence to suggest that this should not just be a short-term thing?
Right, so I'm Jennifer McCombs. I am a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation, and I've conducted about a decade of research on summer learning programs. Some of them primarily focused on those that combine academic and enrichment opportunities to youth who might not otherwise have opportunities or who are struggling academically. But I've also done work around sort of like after school broadly, and then on looking at the evidence base around different types of summer programs that don't have anything to do with academics. And we actually know quite a bit about the effectiveness of summer learning programs, both those that are academically focused, that speak to enrichment, but also in different types of opportunities like youth employment, different types of programs that are intended to improve students' social and emotional learning and outcomes. And we know that summer learning programs can be effective in producing positive outcomes for children and youth, particularly those who attend at high rates. And we also know that there are challenges in producing those programs that produce the results. And it all comes down to having strong implementation, which really links back to Denise's point about how do we use this moment to build infrastructure. And one of the reasons why this moment was possible and why Summer is an evidence-based program is actually the evidence base led to the availability of funds. And so we need to be thinking about that as we're moving forward. Like, how do we create more evidence for the effectiveness of programs? But also, I would argue that we don't need to recreate all the wheels, right? So we shouldn't be continuing to study and study and study things that we already know that are effective. We have an evidence base on those. And what we need to be doing is studying sort of like the innovation of that, the quality of the implementation of the programs, how well aligned they are to the research base, and generating new evidence about programs that may strike from innovation. What was fascinating to me about this time period and living through this spring is how much districts in particular have changed their thinking about summer learning. So before, when people said sort of like summer, in academic programs and districts, people thought of mandatory programs, and people thought punitive, not fun, horrible, nobody wants to go, effective or not, right? But I didn't hear any districts this summer. Like, they all had really honed on to the evidence about the effectiveness of voluntary summer learning programs, about summer learning programs that provide academic content, but also opportunities, enrichment opportunities for kids to engage. And those were valued by school district leaders equally. Right? They wanted to advance kids academically, but they also wanted them to have opportunities. And I think that's something that COVID has done for all of us, is helped us think about, like, what are the opportunities that are really important? And I think that that's not going to go away. I also want to say that the reason why that this model exists is because of ARA funding back in the day. Like, that is what created the innovation of these types of programs and for districts to put them on that's now being implemented across the country. And so what I'm really interested in, and like interested in everybody in this room, we're all going to be innovating. We're going to be coming up with different types of programs. We're going to be able to learn a lot more about different populations, like middle school, high school students. How do we engage them better? How do we get them to come? What do they need? What do those programs look like? How do we implement them well? We need to know more about rural communities, right? How do we put on these types of programs and serve rural students? And how are we creating different experiences that have benefits for the kids who need the most and have the least access?
All right, so a lot more of my favorite words in there, and that was a good sort of chunk of research summary for us. Tom, I'm going to come to you with two questions in 1 minute, but I'm going to go back to Christian. So you mentioned a couple of things that I want to pull apart. First, you said innovation, a really important word. Second, you talked about voluntary. Third, you talked about specific kinds of programs. So when you talk about summer as a model, inside of that, you mentioned academic-focused programs. Obviously, we have camps, we have employment, et cetera, service programs. So you have lots of different things, and you want them to be evidence-based, you want them to be high quality, but they are diverse, and they really allow young people to follow their interests as much as possible. So I'm going to come back to this question of, can we reimagine an education system? So Christian, you went around and you had these wonderful experiences across the country, and you saw the joy and the level of engagement in voluntary and presumably also perhaps in programs in which young people were required to be there for remedial purposes. But as you think about how we reimagine an education system, when we think of summer as a time of innovation, because school is closed, we have an opportunity to innovate. How do we get that innovation to happen year-round?
It's a great question. I think there's a couple pieces there, and I won't belabor. I think, Jennifer, you spoke to a number of those elements. One is that, I come to this work as a practitioner. I was a district leader, a chief of staff of a large district, and in those situations, we're looking at how to solve a problem quickly, right? So what Summer did, and the resource that came from the federal government, and I was sitting in the district seat at the time, it was, how do I spend these millions of dollars quickly? What I also thought about, and now in this seat, is quickly and effectively. So the evidence-based programs for a district leader is going to be the menu in which I'm going to survey how can I spend. So how do we reimagine? One, we have to bring partners to the table who have done this work well and have done it to scale. And that matters because this moment is really, really large. Right? We're not talking about only 1 or 2 or 3%. We're talking 40 and 50% of student populations who now need additional supports. The other piece is, I think, and this is something I learned this summer during our collaborative, whether the federal government, state, or even local agencies have a mindset of the partners who often come to the table for summer. Boys and Girls Club is a great example. I'm a Boys and Girls Club kid. Walked up and down the hallways, played basketball, swam, worked there all summer, helped me through college. I appreciate the Boys and Girls Club. But that model, yes, awesome. But that model was traditionally a recreational model. This summer, when we were engaging in the Summer Learning Collaborative with many of you as partners, they said, well, we have an evidence-based program on social-emotional learning. In my district leader hat, I would have loved to connect the dots for a superintendent who had been in the seat for 20 years and still just remembered opening the gym at night. So I do think we have to think about who are the partners that we've engaged with historically, and partners have to come to the table and show what's the evidence-based programming you're utilizing in this space. The resource is great, but effective programming is ultimately going to be what determines whether or not that contract, that MOU, that agreement that scales up from 10 kids to 1,000 to 10,000 is what ultimately will be seen as an effective use of that resource.
So Tom, I'm going to turn to you and I'm going to give you 2 questions because I neglected you. So the first, I want to go back to this infrastructure word. So we talk about infrastructure, and yes, it's more than roads, but when I think about infrastructure, and I think about camps, and some of my first love is camps. My first youth work was as a camp counselor. I think about people, and when you think about the diverse membership that you have in ACA, there can't be a more diverse set of people that we're talking about, of places. So camps are not just residential camps, they're computer camps, they're all kinds of things, and the possibilities that happen when young people are invited into a camp structure. So people, places, possibilities, you've got an umbrella organization. Boys and Girls Clubs is wonderful, but a Boys and Girls Club is a Boys and Girls Club. You've got quite a diverse membership. So when you think about infrastructure and you think about what did you do? What did your members do? Last summer, coming into this summer, what did they do to get their people ready? What did they have to do to get their places ready to be safe? And what did they have to do to really market that range of possibilities that was talked about? So we don't just have in my head, oh, does my kid want to go to camp? Or does my kid want to go to summer school? How did you do that?
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Rosenberg. I'm the president and CEO of the American Camp Association. Thanks so much for having me. Great questions. Great conversation. We at the American Camp Association lead the very wide field of camp. It's extremely broad. We serve pre-pandemic, served about 26 million children in 15,000 camps. We try to influence every summer. And they're organized by many different nonprofits and other kinds of organizations, for-profit businesses, everything, government agencies. And at ACA, we call it ACA. It's not the Affordable Care Act, but it's the American Camp Association. But we were all about advocating for youth through the camp experience or summer learning, and we are about research and we're about professional development, evidence-informed professional development, education. So over the past 2 summers, camps were able, and other summer learning programs were able, through hard work, to implement multi-level mitigation strategies that allowed kids to believe that we can do it. Yes, we can, right? Was the motto of many, many programs across our nation, not just camps, all kinds of summer learning programs. And summer learning really shined. We were able to, because I think camp is all about community, right? We're teaching kids at a very young age, and we're teaching college students who are serving those young people how to be a great leader in a community, how to contribute every day, every minute. These are human skills-centered societies, right? So first of all, what did we do? We put down those phones. We put down those computers. Not that technology is not important. We need to teach technology. But we had to reconnect. We had to reconnect as people and teach kids how to socially and emotionally connect. This is all about positive youth development assets, right? Teaching them, practicing them, social emotional learning, but really started out with just connecting. These were kids who were not eating well, kids who were out of shape, kids who hadn't connected with a peer in 18 months. And this was the summer of more, right? There was a lot of joy, as you say, Christian, but it was also a lot of challenges, right? Because all of us have been impacted by this pandemic. So I think that we, at camps across America and summer learning programs across America, we've really been able to, because we convened a lot of research to try to determine how to operate safely in COVID, and then in summer of 2020, we did operate a lot of programs, and then we were able to test that and do some research on that, and then build back on that for summer of 21, where the vast majority of camps and summer learning programs operated successfully in COVID if they followed the protocols well. So we taught kids, we can do this together in community. You can be a leader, I can be a leader, and we can reconnect. And started to rekindle that spirit of, yes, we can, all of us together. And, boys and girls who, before COVID, were, 4-year-olds, or first graders or second graders in day camps who hadn't been through kindergarten, but they were learning basic skills at camp. And we had elementary 5th graders who were now middle schoolers, and we had 10th graders who were now thinking about college, and they were not ready for college, but they were marginally better off. So there's a lot we can do in summer in terms of experiential learning and helping young people belong and contribute and develop all sorts of positive development assets and social emotional learning competencies and 21st century learning skills at camp and summer learning. And we demonstrated that, I believe, for a little over, I'm guessing over 20 million young people. We're working on that number. So there's a lot of implications of how to innovate going forward, right? Working together in partnership, taking facilities that are used mostly in the summer and maybe using them during the year, and talents, teachers in camps with partnering with schools and clubs and communities really coming together for the kids for that whole child education.
So I want to stay with this idea of people and places and possibilities and how they can all be more diverse, and go back to you, Denise, with this word infrastructure. So as we have this opportunity, and we have these wonderful examples across the country, and we have the evidence base that says really broadening, not just softening the walls between school and out of school, or school and community, because that sounds so nebulous, like it's school and then it's everything. Yes. But we do have very specific places where there are people, diverse sets of people, who show up, who are trained, whether they're volunteers or part-time staff or full-time staff, to really offer a wide array of possibilities for young people. Can a part of what we do in the name of infrastructure be a people, place, and possibility inventory? Can we help communities figure out what they have so they can leverage it?
I think that's an excellent idea. First, being able to assess what is going on in your community to actually know the needs. Is it a reading and play program, or is it a drama program, or is it a youth employment program? So assessing what is going on by bringing stakeholders around the table is absolutely necessary. But the other thing that we can be doing with this amazing investment, professional development. The number of providers, I think, would welcome additional innovative professional development opportunities, whether that's language training or enhancing music training or leadership training. Those things make a difference for the infrastructure. The same thing goes for looking for the people power. We recently released a report that I found super exciting because it talked about a new source of teachers. Guess what? After-school providers, summer learning providers, those folks are ready, they know the students, They already want to be the students. All they're asking for is the opportunity, a perfect source for new folks to come into the community. They're already there. Let's make them teachers. Let's get them credentials. Again, the pipeline of opportunity is really here with this federal investment, whether it's people, whether it's places. You talked about the mitigation strategies, HVAC. Those are one-time investments that last for a while, and you're not going to make another investment, which means that you can use, again, the other federal programs, Title I, Title II, Title IV, to do some of the longer-lasting or other one-time things.
Jennifer, I'm going to come back to you on this people, places, and possibilities. As you looked at the diverse things that happen in summer, did you look at who the workforce is?
So I have not looked at the workforce this summer, but I do know a little bit about the workforce overall, right? And so we have a combination. So for district-run programs, we have teachers teaching the academics, and very often they're in partnership with community-based organizations to offer different types of enrichment activities. And there's a wide range of skills and ability in that set, right? So you have anyone from who's working with kids, anyone from like a college student, right, who has an interest in youth, all the way to sort of like a trained professional like artist, for instance, right? And the workforce issue, I think, is really critical both in summer and after school, and I would say even early childhood education falls into this as well, where very often you have the people who are working the closest with kids are often not paid very well, and therefore you have a lot of turnover in that population, and it creates a big challenge on how do you prepare people to manage youth well, right, and lead to their development, and what types of investments do we need to make as a system that can help support and develop that workforce as a real ongoing workforce. And I think that this has the opportunity to do that. So if you think about sort of like after-school workers, summer workers, those combining. And there is the possibility of potentially professionalizing a little bit of this workforce, which would have huge benefits on youth and communities.
That's great. There's a survey, a national survey that's going to be mounted. It may already have been announced this week that the Wallace Foundation is supporting. It's a youth field survey, and it's really going to sort of tap into making sure that we know more about who this workforce is. We don't quite know what to call this workforce. So I've taken to sort of calling it the hidden essential workforce. Because in doing that, and the survey that's coming out is really going to look at those folks who are in those community organizations broadly defined, including librarians and folks who are working in juvenile justice, those folks who are in those places. But if you've been watching the news, we also know there's a hidden workforce inside of schools, that half the people in schools are not teachers. But we also need to have them in that pipeline. So I think we have a real opportunity. I know that the light has turned yellow. We just passed 5 minutes, and I want to make sure we use our time well. So I'm going to put a question out there and have each of you just ponder for a minute and respond to it. And the word, since I like words, the word I want to put out there right now is equity. And when we think about summer and we think about after school, one of the things that I've been saying is we double down on looking at chronic absenteeism as a sign that the conditions for learning might be absent in school when attendance is required. But we're not paying attention to the sometimes heroic efforts that families go to get their young people enrolled in programs in after school and summer when attendance is voluntary. And it seems to me, and I'm going to turn it to you all, that if we're really going to fully leverage summer, we have to start to have a conversation that links it to equity, not just because kids need places to go, but because we need a full year-round data set that tells us whether the quality of learning in those non-mandatory spaces could be the more effective thing to improve. We also know that, of course, those are the most inequitable places because they are voluntary, and voluntary is associated with money. So I'm just going to give you the word equity and ask you, as we're having this conversation in our last 3 minutes, what do you want to tell us? What are your last words related to equity? And I'll start at the end with Denise.
Well, the one thing's for sure is that these inequities that we are seeing that have been exacerbated by the pandemic were there before. This is nothing new. And really the time is now to be using that federal investment to start to narrow those inequities, whether it's through identifying what are the most effective ways to accelerate learning, to deal with unfinished learning, or whether it's a way to bring more community into the programming effort so that there is more enrichment. Our children, our Black and brown children, English language learners, students with disabilities, homeless, children experiencing homelessness, children who've had contact with the juvenile justice system. These inequities are long-standing, and we need to take what is available to us now and take the political courage and the will to use those funds that will have the most impact. We do not want to get 4 years down the road and see that the outcomes are even worse. And I know that you guys are critical to that effort. I applaud you for what you're doing. I thank you for what you're doing. And I thank Karen for moderating a wonderful panel.
We got a minute and a half left here, guys. We're going to push it right to the end. Any other comments on equity? Christian, I'll go to you on the other side.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously this administration has focused on equity and really has put it front and center in our work. The reality for us on Around American Rescue Plan was, we explicitly stated that we wanted to ensure that those students and families most impacted by COVID were those who targeted resources went to. And, we're going to continue to monitor and support districts and SEAs who are doing that work. But I do also want to applaud you because for many of you, that's what you've been doing your entire existence, and this isn't new to you. Our ask now is that number is much bigger. There's a scale issue here, is that we're talking about students and families who we didn't see before, who are now, because of the light of COVID, has shown that the inequities are serious. And I want to thank someone for saying rural communities, tribal communities. We went to a tribal college in Michigan, and students had to walk to get to the location just so they could take the course they needed to graduate high school. Think about that. And there was no bus system. There was no additional supports. They did it voluntary. So that work is important for us, and equity is going to be front and center in the space that we reside, and we look for all the partners who are willing to join in that fight with us. Thank you.
Well, we're going to end with those bookends because we've now hit the magic time. I want to thank the panelists for a wonderful conversation. I wish it could go longer, but we need to get Ellie Mitchell up here. So thank you so much for joining me.
My name is Ellie Mitchell, and I am the director of the Maryland Out of School Time Network. And I want to thank the National Summer Learning Association. I'm very honored both to be following in the footsteps of Karen Pittman, which is also a little daunting, and to be part of this panel. In the work that I do as a systems builder, we've really learned that in coalition building and policy development, that hearing the voices of and perspectives of practitioners on the ground is incredibly valuable. And so we're going to jump right in. And so the first thing we're going to do is a little lightning round, which will involve you introducing yourselves and answering the following question. What are some of the innovations, or actually pick one innovation that you have seen during the pandemic from our field or in the programs that you've observed or in the programs that you run? We know that the youth development folks were kind of on the ground quick with new ways of doing programming to impact students during this pandemic. So I'm going to start with Chris Smith. Chris, so introduce yourself and tell us about that innovation you've seen.
Thanks, Ellie. Chris Smith, Executive Director of Boston After School and Beyond. We're a network of nearly 400 after-school and summer programs who serve about 25,000 kids in Boston. All those programs adopt common measures of program performance so that we can learn with and from one another. And the last 18 months called upon our ability to use the entire city as a classroom. And what I mean by that is making learning happen in places that are not school. It's long been an effort in Boston. My colleague Arthur Pearson from Thompson Island Outward Bound is here. We have young people learning all around the city and beyond with their teachers in many cases. And so obviously when schools were closed, we were desperately in search of places where kids could go to learn safely. And I would say that we feel fortunate that we are ready for that moment. And that's in part because we were part of the 5-year study with the Wallace Foundation in Rand, and also Pittsburgh, Dallas, Rochester, New York, Duval County that produced the research that Jennifer McCombs mentioned. Part of that research, part of building that research helped us get sites ready to serve kids outside of school. So we felt fortunate to have a solid infrastructure in place, good measures to assess learning and engagement, and really that was the only show in town for a while. So we flexed that partnership muscle and the ability to use the entire city as a classroom.
Excellent. Kahina, you're on the ground running programs. So what were some of the innovations that you found? And tell us a little bit about your program.
Test.
There we go. Testing, testing.
The innovation happening right on stage.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Again, I'm Kahina Haynes, and I serve as the Executive Director at the Dance Institute of Washington, right here in Washington, D.C. Our organization sits at the intersection of really investigating how to strengthen what we all know to be a widely accepted concept of how performing arts yield positive outcomes for youth. We build on that because we recognize, though, that performing arts is some of the least accessible opportunities and activities for youth. So we spend a bulk of our time looking at how do we eliminate barriers to these activities, and once we eliminate that, once we increase access by eliminating those barriers, what kinds of data-driven services and programmatic elements do we integrate to really magnify and sustain those outcomes once they matriculate from our program. So we've been doing that for over 30 years, and specifically the innovations that I would say I witnessed, not just with our programming, but throughout the city. I was really excited to see people finally identifying what I would describe as sort of the common denominators between the non-conventional educational programming and the conventional. So in other words, we know that the two synergistically yield outcomes, but it's always been around. It's always been understood as complementary as opposed to being directly related, or it's been correlational as opposed to looking directly at how those intersections yield those outcomes. And I saw that happening throughout COVID. People really saying, well, what is it about this music program? Or what is it about this dance program? It's not enough that it's just enrichment, and enrichment is added, so we're getting a stronger outcome. No, there's something really magical happening in these different kinds of educational settings. We're gonna look at that more intentionally, we're gonna examine that, and we're gonna see how those takeaways can be applied to year-round. So.
That's excellent. We're gonna come back to you to really get that perspective on the different lenses that the arts bring in particular. Elaine, you had a very unique experience and perspective coming as a National Summer Learning Association Congressional Intern. Can you tell us about that experience and a little bit, and also what innovations you might have seen in that work that you have been doing?
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. My name is Elaine Ansa. I recently just graduated from the University of Delaware this past spring with my bachelor's in political science. Thank you. And then I spent the summer interning for Senator Chris Coons. I was sponsored by the National Summer Learning Association, and I was also in another program called College to Congress, and they both kind of worked simultaneously to support me in my internship program, and thankfully I was lucky enough to get a job afterward. I'm currently working in the House of Representatives as a legislative correspondent, so, you know, thank you. So the program that I did over the summer with National Summer Learning Association, it works, and you know, I think I'm a testament to that, and a couple of other interns in my cohort as well. So over the summer, I was very fortunate to be in Senator Coons' office, specifically because he takes interns pretty seriously in his office, which isn't too common just in general in, I guess, Congress. And I was a highlight of my internship. I think that just speaks to the overall vibe, I guess, that I got, was my shadow day with Senator Coons. It was basically like a day in the life of a senator. So I got to step out of the intern suite for a day and follow him around to all his meetings and, meeting different stakeholders and senators and media personnel. And it was, definitely a highlight that I don't think many interns have, unfortunately. And also because of my participation with National Summer Learning and College to Congress, they connected me with so many, different networks and people within Congress, people working on the Hill or not even on the Hill, but just generally in Washington to give us a bunch of different resources and connections that, we didn't even think that we would need or we didn't know about. So it definitely, they connected a lot of gaps for me that I didn't even know were existing, if that makes sense. So yeah, it was a great experience, and because of connections with College to Congress, they connected me with the House Diversity and Inclusion Office. So I was able to go through their resume endorsement process, and through that, it just kind of like interviews kind of just started coming, and I was able to take a position with Congresswoman Sherry Bustos as a legislative correspondent, and it's definitely been an interesting journey for me these last couple of months. Graduating post-pandemic, this gray area we're in now, and to go from Delaware to DC to now I live and work in the area. I think, my experience, not that it's unique, but it should be more common for more interns, and not just with, government and politics, but why not in STEM or graphic design or whatever. And, I think National Summer Learning has the resources to expand to a whole bunch of different students, and not just students of color, but also first-generation students, is something I realized. There's a lot of things when you graduate, they tell you, get your degree, graduate, you're gonna be good, get a job, but it's way easier said than done. And a lot of students don't know what they don't know. And I think Erin did a great job of connecting a lot of gaps for me, connecting us to people that we didn't even know existed. So overall, I'm just super grateful for my experience, and I wish nothing but the best for National Summer Learning, and I want this program to expand, like way beyond just last summer, so yeah.
Yes, I think more of everything you just said is very important. So Rob, you are at the Digital Harbor Foundation, which is an organization very near and dear to my heart. Would you like to tell us a little bit about Digital Harbor? And then I know you guys, you are innovators at all times, but you were particularly able to step up during the pandemic. And tell us a little about that.
Well, starting off, I'm on a panel of really great people. My name is Mr. Rob Moore. I am the Tech Center Manager at Digital Harbor Foundation. We are an organization that creates, or we connect that digital divide between students and educators. Your warm-up question is super awesome because this summer we had an opportunity to work with young people and to hear from young people. And that's the difference. We're in a COVID pandemic, and we need to hear from young people because it's affecting them too. And to be totally honest, they were looking as we're making these decisions, right? So children are seeing the decisions that we're making and coming up with this reasoning of why we're making these decisions. And this summer, we literally had children at the round table with us as we were making COVID decisions about our particular space that we were in, about the limiting people there, how we did online etiquette. All those things were all student-led. So one of the things that we got from COVID was, you know what, we can back away some and let the students lead. And they will lead and come up with really good ideas.
Excellent. So I'm going to come back to Chris. I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience as a commissioner for the National Academies of Science report on summertime experiences, very relevant to our conversation here. And at that work, they have some recommendations and also really thinking about citywide approaches to student skill development and summer learning in engaging ways. Can you talk a little bit about that work and maybe where we can learn more about it?
Sure, that report came out in 2019, and it was a panel of experts from education, human development, all sorts of fields, and me. And I had the pleasure of joining that commission and really hearing the latest, best research on what we know about summer. It's interesting, though. We spent a lot of time thinking about how to describe it. How do you describe the absence of school? And of course, summer learning is about more than the absence of school. We know that. And little did we know that 6 months later, that nature would show the entire world what that looked like. But the basic recommendations, there are several of them, but they fit together, and they fit within the theme that we can accomplish more together than we can alone. In other words, there's no single entity that can take on all of students' needs and opportunities in the summertime. It requires partnerships at the federal level, the state level, individual programs, philanthropy, all taking on this cause together. And so I'd invite you to read the report. For us in Boston, we play somewhat of that role, and we're part of a national coalition called Every Hour Counts. It's 30-plus cities who do similar coordinating functions, and I know the Wallace Foundation has invested in many of them. But I'll just give you an example of how that paid off and how that National Academies report came to life. The value in having a citywide purview across schools and community organizations, a focus on academics and skills, and enrichment does a couple of things. It allows individual programs to play to their strengths, and I'm not at all surprised that your program was popular. You draw kids based on their interest and passion, you build confidence, you keep them more curious. Every individual program does that. What we're most proud of from this year is we brought on 30 new unincorporated programs, meaning they don't have 501c3 designations. These are grassroots programs that are wildly popular among kids. It was critical that they could walk to them and meet them in person in summer 2020. But many of these programs had never received a single grant. So even though they only serve 30 kids now, they're not going to get to scale at 300. But this program is irreplaceable for those 30 kids. There is no good substitute that offers more scale. But by working together across programs, we were able to attract substantial private and public investment that took care of the grassroots programs along with bigger programs. So I think when you have a system like that or a network like that, when you work across boundaries, everyone can play to their strengths on behalf in serving kids, and we can create a more equitable funding system where programs that might be invisible are able to access funds.
It's very exciting to hear about that inclusivity of all the different types of programs, because that really reaches young people then where they are. I want to turn to our two program providers who are doing that work very personally. And first, Rob, I want to come back to you. You had a very specific program that allowed young people to be leaders and problem solvers, which is kind of a hallmark of your organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the hackathon?
All right, so you're talking about our COVID Slam. Our COVID Slam was a hackathon, and we were coming up with ideas to beat COVID, right? We're in a pandemic. There's all sorts of barriers that COVID put up. And the children's, their whole problem statement was to really get down, find a solution for a problem that exists right now because of COVID. They separated into about 9 groups of 4, and they all came up with a different idea and a different problem, a different challenge that they were going to solve. We ended up picking we picked about 3, the 3 best ones, and all I can say is you go to digitalharbor.org and you'll see the work that they're up to, because I can't even explain some of it. Some of the children, and their age ranges from elementary to high school. Elementary kids thinking about problem solving, right? That's something that we really need to nourish more and more, is those younger people thinking about problem solving. So once again, the COVID Slam was a really good hackathon that allowed young people to take a look at those situations that were going on right in front of them and to figure out solutions for those problems that were happening right in front of them.
Can you give us an example of one of the solutions from the young people?
So guess what? If you go to the Digital Harbor Tech Center, our tech center is now laid out much different than it was pre-pandemic. And that was all because of the 6 feet protocol, right? So everything in our building was all reimagined by our young people with the 6 feet protocol involved. So they had signs up now in our buildings. There's places to stand. The children's etiquette even changed, right? They even stood, 6 feet from each other and noticed when other people weren't. The mask policy, they were self-checking themselves. No one had to say, hey, shorty, pull up your mask, because they were checking themselves. And yeah.
That's a very Baltimore-specific
yes,
joke.
Yes, it is. That's why I mentioned it.
You can Google it.
Yep.
So, Kahina, your program is very focused and centered in the arts, and you have that lens. Can you talk about that as a different way of thinking through things, and both for summer, for how we're moving forward with our programming?
Absolutely. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but I think artists or arts programs really operate in a unique medium because we're serving students and young people who truly could be processing the world around them differently and communicating back outwardly to that world differently. So arts programs are not just about enrichment or an add-on. For some students, it is a translation opportunity. It is a breakthrough, really, of what has been long-standing for, in a conventional education setting, the inability to communicate and process information. So the opportunity to tap into that is transformative for young people. And I think what we hope to do, what we saw this summer also, was how we were able to address some of the, I won't say issues, but some of the challenges that students were coming to us from the school year, entering summer with some of those processing challenges and experiencing that breakthrough. So the question is now, how do we maintain that? What kinds of tools can we equip both them but also their schools and communities with so that they can continue to experience those breakthroughs, not just in summer? And for us, our specialty is dance, so we focus on that. And some of the highlights that I recall from that is something as simple as a problem that was presented. We had an exposure scare in August, which was supposed to be the culmination of our summer virtual boot camp. And all the administrators and leaders, of course, are thinking, like adults and very, very rigidly. And our students said, well, why don't we just pre-record it? Pre-record it and live stream. And these are students, it seems so simple, but to put this in perspective, some of these students weren't even speaking when they got to our program. They weren't advocating, they weren't articulating thoughts, they were very quiet, very reserved. And in 6 weeks of feeling confident and experiencing affirmation, oh, I'm doing something now that I'm really good at. And that does something to them. So ideas that were once probably, suppressed, they now feel comfortable enough to express. And these are not just ideas, they ended up being solutions. So I think that that's just one example of some of what we saw this summer.
Yeah, the students always come up with the best solutions, always. And it's been amazing to see all of the innovative ways people have done the arts during the pandemic in all the programs that I've seen. Elaine, you had such a positive experience as an intern. I wonder what your reflection is on the access of those kinds of programs for students of color, and what the impact of expanding access to
to programs like the one that you participated in would be like?
Yeah, so as far as, I'm so happy you brought that up. As far as access, I think in my case in particular, I want to say that I got lucky because the program director for the College to Congress that I was in partnership with NSLA, they reached out to me because of just COVID-related situations. So I was lucky in that case, but I think if programs like College to Congress, National Summer Learning were more open to students of color and first-generation students who don't even know that they need things like that, you know, I think, you know, it would be an immense benefit to our society because I feel like there's a demographic of younger students, or not younger students, younger people of this generation who kind of maybe feel ignored or just disconnected from opportunities that come along because they seem to always be funneled to certain students coming from certain places. So yeah, as far as access, I'm so sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's okay.
No, it's okay. Can you say the second part of your
it was
question?
just you really have addressed the question, which is, you know, what would it mean to have more access for students of color in programs like the program you attended?
Yeah, so I was speaking to the demographic part. I think particularly in government and politics, the field that I'm in, it would be a disservice to not pick students from more disserviced backgrounds only because who better to help write the laws and be part of the committees and bring ideas to certain lawmakers than the people who have probably grown up or benefited from certain government assistance programs or summer education programs. Speaking from my existence specifically, I've been involved in summer education since high school, and that was just something that my parents kind of had placed in my life. So yeah.
And so now that you're working in Congress, you're going to help make that
for
be
sure,
part of the policy
and I'm
work?
definitely not the only one. You know, there were other interns in my cohort, other interns that I met that I would, you know, try to put the bug in their ear, or, you know, just different people that you connect with, so for sure.
Excellent, excellent. That's why we need more folks like you working with our congressional representatives. Absolutely. So I have one last question to have everyone answer in our just a little less than, or a little more than 5 minutes to go. So we're seeing the unprecedented investment in after school and summer learning, and I'm wondering how you're seeing that play out on the ground and how you think it will impact the work, and maybe you know you have some ideas about how it should be, but how do you think those funds should be prioritized, and how are you seeing that impact your work on the ground? And I'm gonna go to Chris first, and then I'm gonna go to Kahina, and we're gonna go like that. So Chris first.
I'm gonna double down on Elaine's point. I think we have to create experiences for many more youth. The value of summer learning has always struck us. It's building the knowledge, skills, and experiences that will help you navigate school, college, work, and life. When you think about an experience, once an experience is merely a memory, what do you draw from it? Well, a reference point that you can do something, maybe a deeper sense of confidence, remembering experience, maybe more curious, which puts you on a path in relationships and social capital. So I've no doubt, Elaine, you're better networked now than before your experience on the Hill. And I would make the case that buildings aren't the only thing that last. Experiences can last a lifetime, so they're worth investing in, even if we don't know how to sustain them.
Thank you. Kahina.
Yeah, I like to just lift up and acknowledge and thank you for asking the question before answering it, because it actually ties into my response, which is that so often it's people in positions of power and influence and leadership that are deciding what happens with the funding and not asking necessarily always the practitioners or those, as Elaine said, those closest to the experience or to the problem, what their opinions are or what their experience suggests. So really appreciate the question. With that, I would build on what's been said and add that I think someone said this in the panel before, and they used professional development, and I'll add to that capacity building. And I have really strong hopes that in addition to just direct programmatic funding, that there is investment, intentional investment in capacity building, so that existing practices that are proven can be strengthened, and that's not always just about, it is yes about the implementation, but there needs to be capacity and technical assistance to make sure that implementation happens with fidelity and it happens sustainably. So I would pair that with everything else.
Karen Pittman has favorite words, and I have some of those favorite words in there. Capacity building is one of those. Elaine.
I'm so sorry.
The big investment, the federal investment in after school and summer, what do you think should be the priority for those dollars?
I would say at this point in time, I think the priority needs to be access to internet and computers, at least for students. I know, my generation is more adaptable now to technology, so I feel like put a computer or a tablet in front of a kid and they can do so many things, try so many new things, get into new areas. So that's what I would say the priority should be: internet access, technology access.
Rob, she might have stole your thunder a little bit there.
Well, everybody stole my thunder because they're all really great answers. One of the things that stood out was capacity. I know in the position that I'm in, I'm looking at a lot of retired teachers, a lot of substitute teachers want to come in and become what we call a tech coach, and that is basically an instructor or facilitator. And so with that job, it's basically a teacher, right? You're doing teaching, you're instructing, you're engaging, you're building relationships with young people. And I believe that this money could be kind of funneled to capacity, making sure that those teachers or those people that were in the building that we talked about earlier that weren't teachers, if those people can become tech coaches, if they can become facilitators of dance and things like that, I think we'll be on a better leg. Yeah.
All right, so summer 2022. 3-4 words about what your dream is for summer 2022 to end out our last minute. Summer 2022, what does that look like? Kahina, and then we'll just go straight down.
Innovative.
It's 3 words, right?
Up to 3 words.
Oh.
Go.
I'm sorry. Creative, innovative, sustainable.
Robots, drones, kids laughing.
Expanding access and good vibes. Good vibes, yeah.
In fact, say statewide, memorable, and forever.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you summer practitioners out there. We really appreciate all the work that you do. Thanks.